Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because honestly, we're diving into something that's just completely shaking up the beverage world. We're talking about Pétillant Naturel, or, Pet Nat as it's affectionately called. But here's the kicker. I want to make it super clear right off the bat that Pet Nat isn't just some trendy, cloudy drink you spot at a hip natural wine bar. It's actually a deliberate, philosophical rebellion, literally a pushback against standardized, sterile industrial wine. What we're looking at here is a raw, living liquid that captures the exact, unfiltered energy of the vineyard. In fact, back in the 16th century, people actually called it vin du diable, which translates to the devil's wine. Why? Well, the ancestors of today's winemakers didn't completely grasp the thermodynamics of trapping active fermentation inside a sealed glass bottle. Because this wine is literally alive and actively fermenting, the pressure would just build, and bottles would actually explode in the cellars. It was wild, completely unpredictable, and, yeah, pretty dangerous. But today, that exact same untamed, living energy is the whole reason this style of wine is so deeply revered by sommeliers and wine geeks all over the globe. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 4 main points. 1, the ancestral wine rebellion. 2, inside the living bottle. 3, taming the wild pet nat. And finally, 4, perfecting the culinary pairing. Let's get right into it. So, part 1, the ancestral wine rebellion. This is really a fascinating journey against industrial standardization. It's funny, the absolute newest trend in wine is actually the oldest. Way back in 1531, down in Limousin, France, monks accidentally discovered the ancestral method. Basically, the winter chill paused their wine's fermentation, and then bam, it woke up and created bubbles in the spring. But as we rolled into the 19th century industrial era, the whole wine industry wanted control, right? They wanted total predictability, so they standardized the incredibly sterile, highly manipulated method champenois. Fast forward a bit to the 1990s in the Loire Valley of France, and natural wine pioneers like Christian Chaussard basically said, enough is enough. They actively rebelled against all that industrial manipulation, deciding to revive the authentic yet somewhat unstable ancestral method. And look where we are today. It's blossomed into this massive global movement. It's a worldwide rejection of chemical intervention, all in favor of a pure, naked expression of the land itself. To really understand this, look at the traditional Méthode champenois. It's essentially a deliberate biological rupture. The winemaker creates this sterile, completely dead base wine. Think of it like a blank canvas. Then they force a second fermentation by dumping in commercial yeasts and a sugary syrup called liqueur de tirage. It's about total, absolute control. But in stark contrast, the Méthode Ancestrale, what makes a Pet Nat, is just one beautiful, uninterrupted continuum from the vineyard straight to the glass. It relies entirely on native, wild yeasts found naturally right on the grape skins. We're talking about a completely self-sufficient ecosystem here. Absolutely no added sugars. You are relying 100% on the vitality of that original grape juice. Moving on to part 2. Inside the living bottle. Let's look at the actual science of minimal intervention. We like to call this the naked wine philosophy. And man, because the winemaker is completely stripping away all those cozy industrial safety nets, there is zero room for error. There's no sterile filtration to magically remove bacteria. There's minimal to literally zero added sulfur dioxide to act as a chemical preservative. So the grapes absolutely must be harvested early to lock in that extreme freshness, and then the primary fermentation finishes up completely sealed inside the glass. Because you can't just fix things with chemicals later, the winemaker has to rely entirely on the pristine, raw health of the vineyard to create a liquid that's both vibrant and stable. It's high-stakes winemaking. Which brings us to an absolutely crucial number, maintaining a pH between 3.0 and 3.2. Now, you might be wondering, without sulfates to protect it, how on earth does a Pet Nat survive without just turning straight into vinegar? Well, the answer lies in an extremely low pH. This super narrow, piercingly high acid range acts as the wine's one and only natural sanitary barrier against spoilage bacteria. It's basically an invisible shield. If those grapes get just a bit too ripe in the hot sun and that pH creeps up, the wine is going to be utterly defenseless against nasty microbes. That's why carefully managing the vineyard canopy, shading the grapes to preserve that sharp malic acid, is literally a matter of life and death for a Pet Nat. And since we're skipping the filtration, we get to experience this wonderful phenomenon called sur-lie. This is the intentional retention of dead yeast cells, the lees, left right there in the bottle. Now, in the industrial wine world, this stuff would be aggressively filtered out, but in a Pet Nat, this cloudy, raw imperfection is actually the ultimate mark of authenticity. And it's not just for looks either.
These lees break down and give the wine this absolutely gorgeous, creamy mouthfeel. But even more importantly, those little lees act like tiny sponges, soaking up any trace amounts of oxygen. This gives the wine natural antioxidant protection, keeping it super fresh without needing a single drop of artificial chemicals. Nature's preservative, basically.
Okay, part 3, taming the wild pet gnat. Let's master some elite sommelier service protocols, shall we? First things first, you need to know your enemy here, and that enemy is gushing. Remember how we said Pet Nat is a living, undiscouraged wine full of active pressure and sediment? Well, that makes it incredibly susceptible to a sudden, completely uncontrolled eruption of foam and wine the exact second you pop that cap. Trust me, if you mishandle a warm, slightly shaken bottle of Pet Nat, half of your beautiful, expensive wine is literally going to end up painting your ceiling. So, how do we tame that crazy pressure? Here is your foolproof 4-step sommelier protocol. Step 1, give it a 24-hour vertical rest. Just keep the bottle standing straight up so all that cloudy yeast sediment settles safely down at the bottom. Step 2, and this is absolutely critical, chill it all the way down to 4 degrees Celsius or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Basic physics tells us that cold temperatures actually trap the CO2 directly inside the liquid, which drastically lowers that explosive pressure. Okay, step 3, when you go to open it, tilt the bottle at a 45-degree angle. It's a brilliant little trick. It increases the surface area of the liquid up against the neck, creating this natural physical resistance against the escaping gas. And finally, step 4, always use a service cloth over the crown cap. This lets you slowly bleed out the pressure with a little hiss, rather than just ripping the cap off all at once. Follow these 4 steps, and I promise you're going to get a perfect, clean pour every single time. Now, once it is safely open, whatever you do, please do not pour it into a traditional champagne flute. Seriously. A standard flute just concentrates that carbon dioxide gas way too aggressively. It completely masks all those beautiful, delicate, funky aromatics we want to smell, and it utterly destroys the tactile, creamy experience of the lees on your tongue. Instead, you've got to serve a Pet Nat in a wider, universal wine glass, or even just a standard white wine glass. That wider bowl is a game changer. It allows this living wine to actually breathe, it expands those complex wild yeast aromas, and it lets that incredible velvety texture just completely coat your palate. Which brings us to the really fun part, Chapter 4, Perfecting the Culinary Pairing. Let's talk about matching that wild effervescence and raw texture with food. Because Pet Nat is just so structurally unique, it is an absolute pairing powerhouse. I mean, it shines with dishes that traditional wines completely struggle to handle. First off, consider biological affinity. Since Pet Nat is packed with active yeasts, it has this natural, beautiful resonance with other fermented foods. You've got to try it with kimchi, sauerkraut, or a really rich slice of sourdough bread. They literally just sing together on the palate. Next up is textural contrast. That piercing, high acidity combined with the bubbles, it acts like a little scrub brush for your mouth, completely wiping away heavy, rich fats. That makes it the undisputed heavyweight champion for things like fried chicken or crispy pork belly. Then we have umami affinity. Remember those cloudy lees we talked about? Well, they naturally amplify savory umami flavors. So if you pair a Pet Nat with a rich mushroom broth, some aged Parmesan or nori, the depth of flavor you get is just unbelievable. And finally, taming heat. Pet Nats generally clock in with slightly lower alcohol and sometimes just a tiny touch of natural sweetness. That combo makes them the absolute perfect fire extinguisher for the capsaicin in spicy tacos or hot Thai curries. So, after exploring the crazy history, the hardcore science, the sommelier service tricks, and all that culinary magic, I really want to leave you with this final thought. For decades, the industrial wine machine told us that wine had to be clear, sterile, completely predictable, and perfectly standardized. But as I hope you've seen today, sometimes the most profound beauty actually lies in the untamed, the cloudy, and the radically authentic. So my question for you is, are you ready to abandon perfection and finally taste a wine that is truly, genuinely alive? I highly encourage you to go seek out a bottle of Pet Nat, chill it down, tilt it at 45 degrees, and taste this rebellion for yourself. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and hey, happy tasting.